A few years ago, it was announced that Marvel Studios would be continuing the classic TV show X-Men the Animated Series, arguably the most popular Marvel cartoon. When bringing the show back, fans obviously had a lot of questions on how this would play out. Would it relate to the MCU in some weird multiversal way? Would it stay true to the original series stories? What would the animation be like? Well, we finally have our answers as the show's first season is fully released on Disney+, and oh boy is there a lot to say. And by a lot to say, I mean a lot of good things to say. This show is probably the best show Marvel has put out in years. It takes decades of comic stories and makes it work in one tight season, continuing the storylines of the original show while still standing on its own. It's also good to have the general public enjoying X-Men content again after the last few movies like Dark Phoenix and New Mutants were pretty terrible. I think this show is also an indication of where Marvel is headed in the future. Marvel has always been bigger than just the MCU. With Marvel Studios' willingness to branch out and release an animated show like this that has nothing to do at all with their current cinematic universe seemingly points to the fact that we'll have more standalone, creatively driven content in the future. Perhaps more revivals of the 90s Marvel shows or just animation in general, or maybe even more standalone live-action movies. Regardless, though, X-Men 97 is worth checking out and points to a positive future for Marvel if they can keep it up. When it's all said and done, X-Men 97 is only what it is because of the comics that inspired it. We're fortunate enough in our world today to have had many great adaptations of classic Marvel comics, but far too often are they overlooked in service of the adaptation itself. Having watched X-Men 97 and seen some of these inspirations for myself, I thought I'd do a little video sharing what some of those are so you can go ahead and check them out for yourself. So here's a pretty quick rundown of a number of the show's major inspirations. Some spoilers are along the way too. Right off the bat, you may have noticed Magneto's goofy new suit. Well, this comes right from the trial of Magneto in Uncanny X-Men 200, with the second episode of this series spending a lot of time with TV show Magneto facing his own consequences. This is an easy one, but the episodes with Lifedeath in the title are literally inspired by the comic of the same name, so you could just go ahead and look that one up. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, my least favorite part of X-Men 97 is the romance between Rogue and Magneto. But hey, I guess it pops up in the comics sometimes, like Uncanny X-Men 269 and 274. But oh boy, do I just not like that part of the show. One of the show's many plot twists is the reveal that Jean Grey was actually a clone named Madeline Pryor. The episode Fire Made Flesh is very loosely inspired by the Uncanny X-Men's Inferno storyline from issues 239 to 243. Jubilee gets to have some fun this season with some cool 90s video game references, but don't forget the comic references either, because this episode takes inspiration from the Crunch Conundrum, which is a storyline spanning Wolverine issues 51 through 53, with both the show and comics featuring the villain Mojo, and an alternate older version of Jubilee named Abscissa. A surprisingly dark moment in the show is the genocide of mutants on Genosha, loosely inspired by the new X-Men storyline E is for Extinction in issues 114 through 116, and this series actually has a couple references here to other new X-Men stuff, like Emma Frost's secondary mutation of being able to turn her skin into diamond. The alien race known as the Shi'ar pop up for a little bit, with Charles Xavier hanging out with them as well. Charles went off with them initially in Uncanny X-Men 117, believing the X-Men died in battle, and his cool battle suit appears in Uncanny X-Men 275. Among the major threats the X-Men face this season is Operation Zero Tolerance, based on the crossover comic of the same name and both featuring the big baddie, Bastion. The last few episodes of the show has the X-Men don their older uniforms from the 70s and 80s, and it's good to see Wolverine's brown and tan suit, if only for a little bit. Another storyline that pops up here and there in these final episodes is Fatal Attractions, another X-Men versus Magneto situation, but the most iconic moment presented in the show from the comics is the part where Wolverine gets his adamantium ripped out of him by Magneto, because I guess it was a good idea to send to the guy coated in metal after the Master of Magnetism. Forge's Wall in the final episode of the show is a nod to the Days of Future Past storyline, a dark future where most mutants have been hunted and killed by the Sentinels. The final episode also sees Scott and Jean flung into the future, seemingly in a situation similar to that of The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, miniseries which provides much of the backstory on the character Cable, and the post-credits scene of this series implies that Gambit will return from the dead as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death, a role he once filled for a little bit in the comics. With all that said, hopefully you have some new interesting comics to go ahead and read for yourself. While the show did take inspiration from a lot of these comics, those books themselves are still their own thing and the two aren't exactly the same. So just remember, these comics are why you have shows like X-Men 97. So go ahead and read some of them so we can get more of this good stuff. You've got some good comics to read. Go ahead and enjoy them, and I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.